Let's break down some Michigan football. We're just about a month outside of fall camp as the Wolverines get back at it to defend their Big Ten championship, two running, of course, in 2021 and 22. We got Isaiah Hull on the line from Wolverines Wire. We always enjoy Isaiah stepping by, breaking down Michigan football. Join him on Wolverines Wire. All right, Isaiah, let's break down this offense. Start with the quarterback position. Obviously, probably the best combination of, we've seen Michigan stable in regards to the starting position during the Harbaugh era, knowing who that guy's going to be. But when you match the stability of the position from the starter's spot and match it with the dynamic playmaking ability, this is about as good as it's been under Jim Harbaugh.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that J.J. McCarthy is actually quite a bit underrated, right? Because a lot of people will look at what the season was as a whole. And I know you are kind of what your stats are in a lot of ways. But, Michigan wasn't exactly just letting him go out and do kind of whatever, right? Like he has the capability. We saw it in the Ohio State game. We saw it in spots in the Purdue game. We saw it in spots just kind of throughout the season. Started off the year last year being incredibly accurate, and then it kind of fell off in the middle of the season all the way up until the end. So there became a narrative that he was just kind of okay. But people forget he's a former 5-star. He can make every throw that you want him to, and he's really shown that in just kind of spots. And that was just his first year as a starter, so the training wheels were still somewhat on, even though he won the job over Cade McNamara. Certainly an improvement over McNamara last year, but not a guy that people are looking at necessarily as one of the top quarterbacks. Certainly he comes in around 7 or 8 in top returning quarterbacks when you kind of look at anyone who's kind of polling throughout the league, but he's certainly not thought of in the same sentence or breath as a guy like Drake May. Sam Hartman's probably thought a little bit higher than he is, but has all of the capability in the world, and now has the full command of the playbook, and kind of finally knows what it takes a little bit more than he did. I think that TCU game, Jim Harbaugh said in the spring ball session we had with him, that was a season in a game, right? Like he gave the game away and really put the team on his back and came really close to getting back into it after throwing 2 pick sixes, threw for 343 yards and 2 touchdowns to go along with his 2 pick sixes. So pretty incredible stat line if you could eliminate the 2 giant mistakes. So now he's looking to go into a year with a really, honestly, another schedule that just isn't very good, both non-conference as well as a lot of the teams that Michigan plays in the Big Ten this year. And so it's really kind of J.J. McCarthy's opportunity to really cement himself as his recruiting ranking indicated that it could. And he played his best game against the biggest competition, Ohio State. So it'll be interesting to see how he takes that big step forward. According to just everyone that's come out of Schembechler Hall, they have utmost faith and confidence that and they expect to throw the ball more as a result of having that dynamic talent that honestly Michigan probably hasn't had since, may he rest in peace, Ryan Mallett.
Yeah, so the point that you're hitting on right there is one of 2 narratives that kind of followed J.J. McCarthy through the 22 season and the entire Michigan passing attack. Number 1 is that McCarthy's missing deep throws. He needs to hit those. And then you know what happens there. If that's the observation of certain key people, or it shows up at the wrong time, then it becomes this narrative that's possibly overblown. And then the second portion of this is that Michigan threw the ball less than about 15 teams in the country. There was only about 15 teams that threw the ball less than Michigan, that they need to throw the ball, just flat out give him those kind of reps early in the season, regardless of the score, against live action.
Yeah, and that's something that Jim Harbaugh told us. We met up with him at the big SMSB camp in Detroit, and he said that when everything is written about the 2023 season, he hopes to look back and say that there was an equal amount of rushing attempts and passing attempts. I think that kind of branches into the next part of the offense, and Michigan didn't really feel like it needed to unleash J.J. McCarthy, right? Because even though they had who they consider an enigmatic talent, I agree with that assessment. They didn't really feel like they needed to unleash him because they had Blake Corum and Donovan Edwards. So they didn't really do it until they needed to. They get to that Ohio State game, Blake Corum is too injured to play, goes out for 2 snaps, ineffectual. Clearly, he couldn't move or do any cutting. And then Ohio State was loaded up to stop the run regardless. Then it was finally JJ McCarthy's time to shine. And I just think he needed to get in a rhythm and build some confidence. That first touchdown against Ohio State kind of opened that. And then we saw the deep ball kind of happen a couple times after that, right? So that said, I mean, that Michigan hasn't really felt the need like it needed to air it out, because they have who's considered the best 1-2 punch and running backs in the country, and the best offensive line in the country. So it's kind of one of those things where if you have that in your arsenal, you kind of go back to the Woody Hayes statement. You know, 3 things can happen when you throw the ball, and 2 of them are bad. So you know, you want to put the ball in the hands of your best playmakers, and certainly the running backs last year were. So it's just a matter of Michigan kind of figuring out what's their best course of action. And JJ McCarthy handing the ball off to them last year felt like that was the best course, whereas this year they feel, all right, we still need to get our running backs involved because we have all of this talent, but we also need to utilize the talent that JJ McCarthy has this year and make us a little bit more unpredictable.
Folks, we ask that you would like the video, share these videos out on social media. Folks don't always know that we are here talking college football, talking Michigan football with all of you, unless you extend that offer. So let folks know that we're here talking college football with all of you, and subscribe right here at the Voice of College Football. Get on over to Isaiah's site. Wolverines Wire is where you can find Isaiah and his work on Michigan football. The running back room is the best in the Big Ten. It's arguably the best in the country. And then when you look at Donovan Edwards and Blake Corum as individuals, they might separately be the 2 best in the Big Ten, may separately be the 2 best in the country. The only matter at hand is, hey, let's keep both of these guys healthy. We saw 2022 where Edwards was banged up early, and then, of course, he came roaring down the stretch when needed when Blake Corum left, and he really lit it up against Ohio State, Purdue, and against TCU for big numbers that almost got him to 1,000 yards, largely in the strength of those 3 games. Your thoughts about their use, how they complement one another, and again, the use of the 2 leading toward the big games down the stretch.
Well, what I'm interested to see this year is how Michigan does deploy the tandem of them, because it feels like, you know, put them both on the field at the same time, because Donovan Edwards, he has a little bit more capability than Blake Corum in the sense of he can catch the ball. He's probably Michigan's best receiver, and that's not a knock on the receivers. That just speaks to how good of a receiver Donovan Edwards is. As you mentioned, got injured in going out for a catch in week 2 against Hawaii. He revealed to us, a couple of us were up in Traverse City and for an NIL event, and he revealed, hey, I had a torn patella tendon the entire year last year, stemming from that incident in week 2. And he said, actually, that right side of my right leg has never been really up to par compared to my left, and now it's good. And he's like, now my thumb has been surgically fixed. I'm good to go. I'm ready to go. So that's I think the big question, in the sense of how does Sharon Moore try to figure out how to deploy these guys, because you want to be able to put Blake Corum out there to do his types of things. And I'm not going to put a limit on Donovan Edwards either to say that he didn't improve. Obviously, he did physically, but going into last year, what was interesting was when it was going to be those 2 and Hassan Haskins was gone, the big question all fall camp was who's going to be that guy that's going to get you short yardage, because it was well believed that Blake Corum was not that guy. That, you know, Hassan Haskins always had that fall forward capability. Well, Blake Corum learned how to be that guy and very much was that guy. Michigan needed 4 yards. If it was 3rd and 4, you knew he was going to get 6. It happened pretty much regularly. So I think the same type of thing. I'm wondering if Donovan Edwards has added that to his arsenal. And then the same thing goes for Blake Corum. If Blake Corum learns how to be a little bit more dynamic of a pass catcher, I mean, how do you stop that? So they've got those 2 guys that have similar skill sets. Both have a lot of speed, but also can do very different things. And I think the big question is, how do you deploy them? Last year, Michigan was very heavy on Blake Corum and gave him the ball 30 times a game. Jim Harbaugh said back on June 1st that his intention is each of them gets about 8 to 10 carries a game, or at least 8 to 10 touches. He didn't say carries, he said touches. That's important to note. So it will be interesting to see how that goes, or, do they end up reverting back to what they were doing? Blake Corum gets to be on a roll and he keeps going. Edwards is predominantly a home run hitter, whereas Blake Corum has that Barry Sanders-esque shiftiness, right? He can make those cuts and make guys miss. So they're certainly both thought as lightning, right? Compared to Hassan Haskins being the thunder to Blake Corum's lightning. This is more lightning and lightning, but they both have different kind of utilizations. Now the question is, how much did either try to learn the other's craft? Because that's certainly the type of thing that Michigan constantly tries to do in off seasons. And then how do you put them out there? I think that the Penn State game last year was I'd say a macrocosm of that, because they just kept handing the ball off to either of them. It was Edwards that got hot before Corum, but they didn't really try to pass the ball in that game. So it'll be interesting to see if they can have similar production while adding in more of the pass game that they clearly want to utilize with JJ McCarthy.
And when they're both healthy, the effectiveness of a third back is not important. But if you get into a situation like last year, when only one is fully healthy all the time, then the effectiveness of what the number 3 guy is, who becomes the number 2 guy, whether that's CJ Stokes or Khalil Mullings or someone else, then becomes they become more important, obviously, to give the first guy a blow and be a competent backup. So the 2 names that I mentioned, are those the 2 guys in play? Anybody else?
I would say those 2, but I would also add true freshman Benjamin Hall, who really showed out in the spring game. Not a highly recruited guy at all, out of Kennesaw, Georgia. And he was a 3-star, wasn't even a starter on his team, I don't believe. I actually met up with him last week, and I told him, I was like, I had a feeling you were going to show what you showed in that spring game when you got over 100 yards. The first moment I saw you, because he arrived in at the end of the year last year, got to, as an early enrollee, partake in bowl prep, and he went with the team to Phoenix. And these guys' legs are tree trunks. They're the biggest legs I've ever seen on a running back. It's one of those things you just take one look at that and you're like, that guy's going to be able to move some piles, and he's got speed on top of it, which is kind of incredible. So I think I would add him to that mix. Khalil Mullings, he had 2 very inopportune moments, right? It was the spring game last year when he fumbled, and then he came in, did really good against Purdue, as well as in just limited duty against Ohio State, only to fumble on the goal line again in the college football playoff against TCU. And then CJ Stokes, his fumble against Maryland in week 4 was kind of the moment that he got shut down. But I talked to him on June 1st as well. And CJ Stokes said, like, listen, that's not indicative of who I am. The coaches have seen what I'm capable of. I'm breaking these big, long runs constantly in practice. So I think Michigan has a wealth of riches. I mean, they might not all be these highly recruited names, right? None of the 3 that we're talking about here are necessarily guys that you're going to put on the same level as the 2 starters. They're not going to be on the same level as what Ohio State or Penn State has as their 2 main guys. That said, Michigan's had some pretty good opportunities given to them by 3-star type tailbacks, coached by Mike Hart, who himself was a 3-star tailback. It's from Hassan Haskins out of Eureka, Missouri, to Karan Higdon out of Florida, who was an Iowa commit. Both of those guys were 3-stars, were not highly regarded, and yet turned into being really good players. I would not be surprised if one of those 3 has that type of capability within them. The question just is how many opportunities are they going to get, just kind of given the wealth of talent, but with the 2 co-starters.
the opportunities were scarce for the two starting wide receivers, or two of the three starting wide receivers. If you look at, of course, Cornelius Johnson and Roman Wilson, but they came up big in various spots, laid down the stretch against Ohio State and against TCU. Take out Ronnie Bell, who, of course, from an offensive standpoint, he almost exemplified the resurgence of Michigan football, kind of going through that down period in the 2020 season and really showing his leadership skills in addition to what he brings and brought for Michigan football on the field. So Ronnie Bell moves on, but Johnson and Wilson back. And so is it their deal, or do guys like Darius Clemens, even like the recruit that they brought in, English, those guys and others on the roster, will they need other guys to step up?
I definitely think they're going to need more than those two to step up, but those are the two guys that need to step up the most. Not saying they can't do it. They've done it. We've seen it in 2021 when Ronnie Bell went down in week 1 with an ACL tear. It was Cornelius Johnson and Roman Wilson who stepped up. Now, Wilson has had the bad luck of being injured on the road in week 5, 2 straight years. That's not been great. What you could see in the TCU game when Michigan was trying to stage a comeback, you could see kind of what he was capable of, making just incredibly dynamic, electric plays. He's one of the fastest wide receivers in the conference, but don't really get to see it that often. Cornelius has that capability of being that big possession receiver, but he's been kind of streaky, right? Like I feel like, and I've said this on Locked On Wolverines podcast several times, it's like every time that I make like a verbal mention on the sidelines of Cornelius Johnson having kind of a disappointing game or disappointing stretch, it's almost like he hears me and suddenly starts making big catches. He did it at Indiana, literally like 2 plays before he got his first of 2 touchdowns in that game. I said something about it, him not, maybe not being the guy that you want to throw to. And then he is the one who got Michigan kind of going in that game. And I said the same thing again, probably about 2-3 plays before he made his first touchdown against Ohio State. So consistency is probably the biggest thing for him. Healthiness is probably the biggest thing for Roman Wilson because he's just been so limited through a lot of the year. So bubble wrap that guy in week 5. Don't let him go to Nebraska. Maybe just keep him at home, put him in one of those bubble boy type situations. Let him watch it on the couch. Just keep him safe for the rest of the season. I am curious to see who the other guys are. Tyler Morris looks like he could very well take up Ronnie Bell's spot. He's going to be wearing Ronnie Bell's number 8 this season. He's going into his second year. He was a teammate with J.J. McCarthy at the high school level before McCarthy transferred to IMG Academy. So they certainly have a rapport there. And you mentioned Darius Clemens. I think that he could be that next really great receiver for Michigan, but we didn't really see it much of it in year 1. That's not abnormal. You don't always look at first year receivers and expect them to be breakouts. It's more year 2 and beyond. But that said, I mean, they really like some of the freshmen they have. You mentioned English. He just got on campus for summer conditioning, but they really like what they've got in Frederick Moore and Samaj Morgan. Morgan being kind of that smaller, shiftier type, Ronnie Bell type, essentially, more of an inside slot type receiver. He's a local guy from West Bloomfield, but Frederick Moore out of Missouri was a 3-star. They really like him. He's a little bit taller. He's not huge by any means, but he had a couple of really big catches in the spring game, and I think that might be indicative of what he's capable of and their faith in what he's able to do. One he had like a 40-ish yard catch. It wasn't a catch and run. He went downfield and went up and got it, and that's the type of thing that Michigan really needs, is that downfield passing attack, right, to get those receivers to be able to make those types of plays. So that would be, most of them. But let's not forget Peyton O'Leary, and I almost did, actually, because Peyton O'Leary was the guy who set the spring game on fire. He's a former walk-on. He got talked about last year in fall camp as being a Cooper Kupp-esque, and then just didn't really show up in games. And, everyone kind of wondered, was Jim Harbaugh just bloviating just about, trying to get everyone involved in his little depth chart performance. But then we finally got to see it in the spring game. I mean, he absolutely put the corners on skates. After all of this talk of Amarian Walker being a unicorn at cornerback after moving him from wide receiver, he just had him looking awful the entire time, and anyone they put on him just didn't really seem to matter. So I think that he's going to play a big role. I think I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up being that number 3 guy, because he has kind of everything that you want. Under recruited type of player, played lacrosse, I believe, initially, and he's thought of inside of Schembechler Hall as being one of the better receivers. So it'll be interesting to see if he comes out and makes a big difference.
Isaiah Holes here to help us get set for Michigan August camp. You can track Isaiah's work there at Wolverines Wire and also his podcast, Locked On Wolverines. You see the designations right there on the banner. Always enjoy the conversation with Isaiah. Well, what's been enjoyable for Michigan's skilled players that we've run down is, of course, the offensive line and the work that they've done in being a 2-time Joe Moore Award winner. I know the award's only been around since 2015, but they will forever be the back-to-back winners the first time ever. Olu Oluwatimi, of course, proved to be one of the great transfer portal additions across college football as an All-American. Ryan Hayes as well moves on to the NFL. So they bring in the 2 Stanford players, the center, Drake Nugent, and also the tackle. They also have, of course, an offensive lineman coming in, Ladarius Jefferson from Arizona State. So the Pac-12 serving Michigan football in this offseason. Your thoughts about Michigan being able to maintain that type of standard up front?
I absolutely think they will. And I know that sounds really homer, like that, how do you think they're going to be good? Yes, I do. But when you look at the starting talent that they return, just from the guys that were on the team previously, like you look and you say, well, they lost, Oluwatimi and they lost Hayes, and those are big losses. Well, they returned 2 guys who could have gone to the NFL this last year. NIL was a big part in bringing them back, and that's Trevor Keegan and Zach Sinter. Those are guys that very well could be day 1 or day 2 type picks after this year. They're especially Zinter. He's really just brutal out on the field. And then you've got 2 right tackles that have both started in Carson Barnhart and Trente Jones. They're going to be battling it out for that right tackle position, I would imagine. But Carson Barnhart has started multiple times over the course of his career at either of the tackle spots. And then Trente Jones beats him out to begin the year, gets injured in week 6 at Indiana, and Carson Barnhart comes in. And once he was so good that when Trente came back, they were like, you know what, let's just not even mess with it. So they've got 2 guys at right tackle who have starting experience, high level at that. And then you've got a guy like Gio El-Hadi who replaced Trevor Keegan when Keegan was injured early in the season for multiple games. So you've already got 5 guys right there that have starting experience. And you add Jeff Percy, who started the Rutgers game at left tackle when Ryan Hayes was injured. I mean, that's pretty incredible to have that type of depth and experience. And they've got other guys that they really like that might still not see the field yet because they brought those transfers in. Ladarius Henderson, certainly, he was another guy that I got to see at that NIL event in late June, and he looks like an NFL left tackle as far as his stature. Was an absolute bruiser and mauler playing guard at Arizona State. So it'll be interesting to see how quickly he's able to adapt. He was on campus doing his online classes for Arizona State, but not able to participate in spring ball, but able to witness it. So that'll be interesting to see how quickly he's able to acclimate. But then you look at Drake Nugent, a guy that Max Chadwick from PFF, he came onto my podcast and said, listen, this guy's the best center in the country. We actually had him graded higher than Olu last year, the Remington Award winner. So he's like, I think that he's like, take this bet right now. He's like, I'll go ahead and say that Drake Nugent is going to win the Remington Trophy this year. So if Michigan can get a Remington Trophy award winning performance out of Drake Nugent, you've got all these other guys. I'm not even talking about Miles Hinton, the former 5-star who transferred over from Stanford. He'll have to fight for whatever spot he gets, whether it's guard or tackle. Just kind of given all of that experience I just laid out. I don't see how they don't win a 3rd straight Joe Moore Award unless they're just like, listen, we can't give it to Michigan every year. But they've got all those guys. And then I'm not even talking about Raheem Anderson, who was the heir apparent at center, who's had a really impressive spring as well as summer conditioning. They think very highly of him. He's been in a battle with Greg Crippen. You've got these other guys who are kind of ancillary role players who had been thought to be those next guys to step in at guard or center, like Reese Atterbury. He's been kind of oscillating between guard and center throughout his career. He's been thought of as being a starting caliber guy. I mean, the list goes on to the point where I forget, because there's just that is such a deep position for Michigan, and it's such a stellar turnaround for Jim Harbaugh and Sharon Moore compared to what it used to be. Because for a while it was like, who's going to step in there? Well, they're going to put someone who's undersized, and it's not going to go well. The offensive line only started becoming a strength, and it wasn't the strength in 2018, 3 years after Jim Harbaugh arrived in his fourth year. But it never became this good, obviously, until 2021. So it'll be interesting to see how they make all of these pieces kind of work. How do they keep everybody happy? Because that is a ton of talent. They probably have, you could probably go to their whole second offensive line and have very little drop off. They very well still could be the best in the Big Ten, just kind of with their second group. That's a pretty incredible feat that they've built.
I could have gone to the tight ends an extension of the wide receiver play, but I forgot. So we'll say tight end is an extension to the offensive line. And that fits Michigan football. Certainly, we got Colston Loveland, who stepped up down the stretch. Didn't take long for all of us to feel like, wow, this guy is a find. Where was he? And I'm talking about folks outside of Michigan circles that just saw him show up on the field and start making plays downfield. He had 16 catches and 3 touchdowns. And of course, Michigan likes to have 2 guys that they feel comfortable with as first-rate pass catchers and blockers. And A.J. Barner would be the guy coming in from Indiana with 29 receptions.
Loveland wasn't necessarily little known. If you pay really, really close attention to recruiting, it's kind of rare that a 4-star guy goes under the radar the way that he did. But probably in big part, it's because he was a 4-star coming out of Idaho. It's not exactly a hotbed of talent. But he had offers from Alabama and LSU, and he chose Michigan, and it clearly in year one, he got his feet wet. Now it's time for him to take that next big step forward, kind of being the guy. Played receiver in high school, and you could really see that, especially with that touchdown against Purdue where he split the defenders and went up and just got it. I was in the end zone, did not even realize he got it. I was like, and only reason I knew he caught the ball was because I heard everyone cheering. So it was a heck of a play by him, especially watching the replay. So I think that the next step for him is to learn how to block a little bit more. Supposedly that's one of the major things he's worked on. So I'm curious to see how that works out. A.J. Barner, that's a heck of a transfer for Michigan to get. He's a guy that Tom Allen had told him that he had the capability, the talent to be the best tight end that Indiana had ever had. Was a team captain for the Hoosiers. Just didn't really work out that way. They just didn't really try to get him the ball, right? Like he says he could set all of the records in Bloomington, and they just didn't really get him the ball. But he's got the leadership. He's certainly got the ability. He's not necessarily quite as muscular as like a Luke Schoonmaker who's just departing, but kind of a hybrid between Luke Schoonmaker and Eric All. And whereas Colston Loveland somewhere between Eric All and, just pick a receiver, I guess. So I think that it will be interesting to see how the blocking aspect works, because I wouldn't look at either of them as necessarily being just at this juncture until we see it more in games that either of them are really going to have the type of ability that Luke or Eric had. But I mean, they have other guys that can, right? Max Bredesen, former walk-on, he was brother Ben Bredesen, the starting left guard and team captain. He's been a really positive blocker for Michigan, especially in the pass blocking. I think if I'm remembering correctly, he was the top tight end in pass blocking when he was in there, according to PFF. And then Matthew Hibner has just kind of waited his turn, another 4-star out of Burke, Virginia. He's just been kind of biding his time. Had the big special teams play against Maryland to open the game. But it hasn't been able to really see the field because there's all this talent that Michigan's had. And that's not even mentioning the other freshmen, because Michigan's never really seemed to be afraid to get freshmen involved. I didn't even mention Marlon Klein, who's going into I can't even remember if Marlon Klein's a sophomore or a freshman, because we just don't see some of these guys at this point, right? But Deacon Tonielli is coming in. I think Marlon Klein's the other one. They've got a lot of talent. Some of it's very untapped, but certainly a lot of bodies. Definitely really good pass catchers. I'll just be curious to see how the blocking aspect goes, because Eric All was not afraid to throw himself into the fray. Luke Schoonmaker went from being a guy who was thought as primarily a blocker to being a guy who became a big time pass catching threat for Michigan. So I that's the one place that I think on the entire offense I'm looking at it and saying, all right, that could be something to look at. I don't know that it will be, but it could be.
Yeah, I'm not going to question the 1-2. Colston Loveland is a big angular guy. And when I say big, I mean tall. So he's not necessarily built like some mauling tight end.
And he's like a male model. And I say that because he literally, granted, this NIL thing, I was shooting photography, and he felt very uncomfortable, but my girlfriend who was shooting with me, she was like, she was calling him, I think, to his face, an Abercrombie model, because that's what he looks like. He's got that lean, angular, like you said. Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how much he's willing to put his body in there.